My name's Danlawrence. I'm a human performance coach and head of performance at Matchroom Boxing. I've coached over 30 champion athletes from NFL Super Bowl winners, undisputed boxing champions, and numerous Premier League footballers. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to build a world champion boxer. And I will come to the program shortly, but for now, we're going to start with the specific exercises of what we do and what maybe we don't do with certain athletes. It's never a one-size-fits-all approach. We go through an in-depth screening and assessment on the front end to see how the athlete moves, and then we can choose certain exercises that drive a specific physiological adaptation. And that's the key here. We don't just pluck random exercise out the air. We do an exercise to drive an adaptation. So for example, if we're in a strength block and we're looking to raise up a limit of force production, remember force times velocity equals power, then I'm probably not going to choose something like a single leg skater squat with huge amounts of instability to raise up a limit of force production. We'd likely use something like a trap bar deadlift. You're grounded, you're stable, and myself and John Ryder joke about this one. You can't fire a cannon out of a canoe. If you're unstable, it's going to be really hard for you to produce force. So a solid, stable base is a pretty good starting point if you are looking to raise up a limit of force production. So trap bar deadlift, solid, stable base, stay tight and rip it up. And you can obviously do quite heavy load with that movement. So the exercise is just a means to drive an adaptation. That's something to remember. Do we back squat with all of our athletes? The answer is no, because some of the athletes, as they present on the initial assessment, might really struggle to access shoulder ER, shoulder external rotation, and shoulder flexion and overhead range. They'll likely compensate with what we call lumbar extension to get into that position. Because a boxer's posture, they've been doing that for the last 15 years, some of them, they're obviously going to have some form of postural imbalances that will then mean if we try and put a heavy bar on their back, they're going to have to compensate to get into those positions. So this is the whole square peg round hole. It's not a one size fits all approach. If the goal is to raise up a limit of force production, I'd likely say a conventional back squat with someone like a John Ryder, who's very bound and done things for a long time. He's now retired as I shoot this video, but I'd still squat him, but I wouldn't choose a back squat because he can't access that position and he'd have to compensate, and then you put heavy load with axial loading on the spine. It's probably not the smartest thing to do, and actually athlete's best ability is their availability. So this is actually where it moves me nicely into a safety bar. So a safety bar squat is likely a better option for someone like that who can't access that position, but with a safety bar, and for context, it's the bar you put on your back, but you actually hold it here as opposed to having to get the arms back in this position. As you can really lock through the midline, no dissociation between rib cage and pelvis. Think what happens when you jab someone in the abs. You tighten up and maintain that brace and lock position. That's exactly what we're looking to achieve. You lock through here, you come into the squat, and then you drive up. So you're still getting the benefits from a back squat, but without the negatives of trying to get into these precarious positions if you can't actually access them unloaded. So a back squat for some, but not for everyone. We do tend to work through specific joint angles as well. If we're going through a strength block, so maybe like a quarter squat, where we go through a shorter range of motion, we come down to the pins, and then drive up through that concentric phase. That's a really good way to raise up a limit of force production. We then move into a trap bar deadlift, and if you followed any of my work for however many years, you'd see I'm a huge fan of the trap bar, and it stems from my own background. I had spinal surgery over a decade ago, and I don't do conventional deadlifts because it heightens the risk of a potential reoccurrence. I also really like it for the boxers. There's a low skill component. It doesn't take huge amount of technical coaching, and it's also a great way to raise up a limit of force production in a safe and effective way. We do trap bar deadlifts from the blocks with lots of our guys who have longer femurs. Anthropometry plays a role there because we don't want them, if they've got long legs, to then just be pulling down from this position, because it can increase the risk of lower back issues. A lot of the boxers as well are quite tight through their hips, so it's an area that we have a real awareness piece around to mobilize the hips, to get the glutes firing, to transfer energy from foot to fist through the kinetic chain as they drive into hip extension. So if we can do exercises that are a little bit safer, like a trap bar, then I'm all for it. So a trap bar deadlift from the blocks is a real common exercise I use with certainly some of my taller guys. Overhead pressing. Do we overhead press them with a barbell? And again, it's an it depends answer, but generally speaking, the answer is no. Similar reasons and rationale with why we don't back squat a lot of the guys. If they can't access this range freely because they're really bound through their lats, their pec minor, and all these internal rotators are pulling the shoulder down, I'm then not going to give them a heavy bar and say, right, now let's get up overhead, because they're gonna just flare into, I joke about this one, calling it the Nicki Minaj posture, they'll flare into extension and compensate to get that overhead range, where we want them tight through the core to transfer energy from foot to fist. So a better way of getting them overhead is more of a hybrid way of doing it. So this is what we call a vertical press. this is a horizontal press like a bench press or dumbbell chest press, we might use something like a landmine press. You've likely seen it in the attachment. We come up like so. So it's not a true vertical press, but because they can't access that range, I think it's a much safer version to really get that pressing pattern working, get the tricep working as well. Remember, the tricep extends the elbow joint. So, you know, some might say it's a key focus area for boxers as well. The safety bar I've spoken about, and why I love the safety bar, because you just don't have to put yourself in those precarious positions. A lot of boxers do present in a very similar way with that forward head kyphotic posture. So I do really like the safety bar. I also like it for split squats as well, for again, the same reasons. The Zercher, you may have seen, again, going back to John Ryder, we call him the Gorilla, his nickname, and he's certainly a bit of a gorilla when he does this movement. He's an absolute freak with the Zercher. Would I prescribe a Zercher squat to another one of my athletes? Likely no. In fact, I've only really done it with John Ryder. But I do like it from a deloading of the spine point of view. So a Zercher, for context, guys, the bar's across here. You can do a Zercher squat, or even better, the one I did with John was a Zercher split squat. So now if we're looking at specificity, not to fall too far down the specificity rabbit hole, the joint angles are very similar to boxing. The midline is really getting a workout because you've got lots of load in this position. And what does this look like? It looks like the clinch. So again, the boxers, if they've got, John was doing like silly numbers, 140 odd kilo in this position, you know, he's really getting confident in that position under these amounts of load, so that when he's in the clinch in the fight, he's going to be a lot more confident to know that another man is probably not going to be able to bully him on the inside. So you can use that language and build that narrative to your boxer of really connecting the dots. But again, we're not going to fall too far down that specificity rabbit hole. We then move into medicine balls. You've likely seen them used a lot, and I'm a fan. I'm a fan early on to prime the central nervous system to build explosive power, and also later on in camp like a taper phase. The good thing about medicine balls is there's no deceleration component, and boxers are taught to punch through the target. So we don't want to be slowing down through end range like on a bench press. You accelerate out of the bottom position, but you're obviously slowing down towards that end range. So you have to decelerate. With a medicine ball, boom, punch through the target, use a wall or a partner, and they're a really good modality to use because the boxers again can connect the dots between what they're doing in the gym, in a strength and conditioning setting, and of course what they're going to be doing in the ring. So there's a bit of a rationale behind some of these movements, the do's, the don'ts, the whys. The general answer is it depends. You've got to go through your initial assessment and screening and then choose the right exercise to drive the right adaptation you're looking for to build that specific quality. Some of the modalities we use: contrast method, cluster sets, and French contrast method. I'll just give you a broad overview here. So contrast or complex method is what we're going to go through in the program here. It's a very force dominant movement, a heavy movement like a squat or a deadlift to raise up a limit of force production and work. If we've got the force velocity curve, work here, the highest strength, like max strength, around 85% plus of 1 rep max. And then you've got the speed component, the kind of rapid velocity motions and explosive motions on this side of the curve. So you do a heavy exercise followed by an unloaded exercise that mirrors and mimics the joint mechanics of that exercise. So for context, trap bar deadlift, heavy, 3 to 5 reps, and then into something like a counter movement jump that mirrors that same movement. So that's a contrast method. Cluster sets are something we do where we'd have an intra-set recovery period. So let's say, for example, the set was a 4 rep set. Instead of doing 4 reps out the gate, you do 2 repetitions, you pause for 15 to 20 seconds, bar goes down, and then you do another 2. So the focus and language used with the athlete is nail these 2, rip it up with intent, rest, and then go again. So they're not thinking about 4 reps, they're only thinking about 2 repetitions. And that short recovery allows them to kind of regenerate and go again. And we've got the data to prove, based on velocity-based training, how quickly they move that load, to showcase cluster sets really work well in terms of improving bar speed and reaching the goals we're looking to reach. Plus it varies the stimulus a little bit from conventional, okay, I'm just gonna do 5 reps, I'm just gonna do 3 reps. French contrast method is something we do with our advanced trainees. So if they've got a very low training age, we will not go near French contrast method. We'd only ever really do it for 3 weeks for the much more advanced individuals. And this was, yeah, it's something we've used with a couple of the guys, but not all of them. And it's a very force dominant movement. And then again, we work down that force velocity curve with a lot more reactive work. A lot of the fighters do like that. Someone I would kind of scream out at me and say that he really loves it is Joe Cordina. Joe Cordina really loves the more kind of velocity orientated motions. So we give him a bit of a dosage of the force and then he serves the curve and gets a lot more explosive and reactive through the French contrast method. Something we also use is robustness circuits. So for context, I'd only really see my guys for their S&C in gym work twice a week, at the Matchroom gym on the Wednesday and at BXR and Marylebone on the Saturday. Because of that, I still need them to dose themselves appropriately with some of the key focus areas that are going to improve athletic qualities. I'm sure you'd agree, the neck is vitally important for a boxer. Your calf complex is an area that we've really hammered for the past, well, near on a decade, really loading through both the gastrocnemius and the soleus, so straight leg and bent knee positions, to really help when they step back out of range to come back in with a counter. So if you think of the forces going into the floor here, we want to be as springy and reactive to transfer force the way it came. That can be the difference between them getting their shot off or not. If they've got no lower limb compliance and stiffness, they're going to spend too long on the floor to then transfer the force back the other way. So we do a lot around the calf. In fact, my name in John Ryder's phone book is saved under calf raise Dan. True story. We then do a lot of work through the core in terms of transferring energy. We build midline control, and then we look at more kind of reactive components of the core as well as we draw closer to fight night. And the shoulder. The shoulders are obviously, as you throw at high forces and high velocities, the posterior shoulder is really important from eccentric control, from a scapular point of view as well. And going back to the common postural traits that we see with our fighters in that rounded forward head position. They're throwing these shots at those high speeds and high forces. We've got to show some love to the shoulder complex. So releasing the lat, getting into the pec minor, and doing lots of work around the posterior shoulder is vitally important to best mitigate shoulder issues. So for context, they might do their S&C, as I say, Wednesday and Saturday, full sessions, and then the robustness circuits, we use a microdosing formula where we give them a small amount of stimulus throughout the course of the week, 2 to 3 times after some of their spars or boxing sessions, and that might last 15 minutes, nothing more than that. But it means if we're looking broad overview at their overall physical preparation, they're literally getting every aspect that we need to really improve their athletic potential. And then moving into the specific program. So this is just an example of a program that I'd use with a number of my athletes. So the warm-up, we utilize the RAMP protocol, and RAMP simply is an acronym for raise the heart rate, activate specific muscles, mobilize around key joints, and potentiate or prime the central nervous system to get you ready to train. Popularized by Ian Jeffries, a 2007 paper if you want to dive into it. But yeah, the RAMP protocol is something we've used very well for a long time. And I break this down into 2 phases. Phase 1 is floor-based, looking at the hips and the thoracic spine primarily. So the thoracic spine, really important. If you're looking at the hooks, and this is the way I get the buy-in, if they're really immobile in the T-spine in both extension, but especially rotation, I say to my guys, look, you're not going to be able to wind that up to then produce power. And if you talk about explosiveness and power to my athletes, then their eyes light up. So that's again how we get the buy-in for doing some things that early on they might think, what the hell is this about? But if you just consistently do it over time, you can start seeing the improvement. You again get the buy-in. And also from an injury prevention point of view, doing the mobility routine is fundamental for my guys. So after you've done phase 1 floor-based, which is very low end, it lasts 5 minutes, you move into phase 2, which is movement preparation. You're starting to elevate the heart rate, attacking the hips, another key focus area. And to get the buy-in, if you're tight and immobile through the anterior hip complex, your glutes, as you try and transfer and rotate into hip extension, aren't going to be worked to their full potential. So we've got to get nice and mobile through those hips as well. And for some of my guys who might have a little bit of a lower back flare-up, we again want to mobilize those hips to impact and influence pelvic positioning. We then look at the activation and potentiation. Activation is a couple of little firing up exercises if you like. We might do a single leg hip thrust or supine hip thrust and some posterior shoulder work. And then we potentiate or prime the central nervous system with things like counter movement jumps or other forms of plyometrics. And then they're ready to rock. So we do tend to extend the warm up to a degree because they don't get a lot of this work outside of our sessions. So we then continue with like a supine hip thrust and reverse cable crossover. Again, supine hip thrust, key focus area, strengthen those glutes. Reverse cable crossover, a great way to target the posterior shoulder. Other exercises here might be a single leg hip thrust, some banded pull apart, or even a bottoms up kettlebell press. We then move into our power development. So we're looking at B1, trap bar jump. And this is a way to really just build explosive power. 3 to 5 repetitions. The load is relatively low. So for context, Joe Cordina might do 50, 55 kilos. John Ryder might do 60 kilos. We're looking at 1 to 1.3 MS if we look at using velocity-based training. And then because it's pure work, we go into a filler exercise. Back extension into a prone T. So they're on the back extension bench, they come up, they're really targeting their posterior chain, and then they work their posterior shoulder with a prone T. I really like that exercise for a lot of my fighters because it bulletproofs that posterior chain, key focus areas. We literally do a couple of sets there. They're now in the room. They're fired up. Their neuromuscular system is ready to rock. And then we go through our strength and power. And we spoke earlier about the contrast method. That's exactly what this looks like here. Trap bar deadlift from the blocks to raise upper limit force production. 3 to 5 repetitions, above 85% of 1 rep max. We would then have a short recovery period before C2, and this is where I see a lot of people go wrong. They'll go straight from C1 into C2, and they actually won't dissipate fatigue. We're looking to dissipate fatigue, to light up the central nervous system and take that into the explosive exercise to jump higher in essence. And then we go into a counter movement jump, load, explode, absorb. And then the C3 is simply a filler exercise, seated calf raise to really overload that lower limb. So these are our pure movements. And then this is high reps, 15 to 20 reps, focusing on eccentrics and isometrics, squeeze, hold, and then control. And we might do 3 sets of that, again, dependent on the athlete, dependent on the day. So that's our main bulk, and these are really the D series auxiliary or assistance exercises. We would sometimes do a D series where it's a continuation of this, but again, depends on the athlete, depends on the day. If I'm seeing the guys at the Matchroom gym on a Wednesday, middle of the week, they're already fatigued, they've got boxing on the Thursday, sparring on the Friday, again, keep the goal. I just give them a little bit of a stimulus, lower volume. I'm very cute and careful with the exercise I choose on a Wednesday, not to induce too much soreness or fatigue, to keep them fresh for those most important sessions. But then on the Saturday, we do, cook things a little bit more. They're aware of that. They then prioritize recovery later in the day on the Saturday and of course on the Sunday, and then they're fresh and ready to rock on the Monday for the new week ahead. The D series assistance exercises, landmine Cossack, working out of that sagittal plane, up, down, forwards and back, moving in the frontal plane now, getting some range through the adductor and just getting them working in multiple planes of motion. Single arm row and contralateral reach using the cable machine is pulling and rotating. So we're getting some nice work through the pulling pattern, again, working their postural muscles, but then also we're getting a big reach which mobilizes the T-spine. So it's kind of loaded mobility work, which is a really good one for my guys. And then offset suitcase walks with a towel, heavy kettlebell, towel around the handle, really accentuating and overloading grip strength. And we know there's a direct correlation between grip strength and shoulder stability. So we want to fire up that grip, which again will help with some of our other movements as well, like the trap bar deadlift. We know a limiting factor for my guys with the trap bar, they're like, oh Dan, I know I can do it, but it's just my grip. Well, let's make that grip even stronger. And also, as I say, improve shoulder stability, one of our key focus areas. So heavy kettlebell, core lock down. You're resisting against lateral flexion forces. You're actually getting a lot of midline control as well. Opposite hand away, lock the shoulder back and down, and just walk with that kettlebell. So that's a broad overview of a program that I'd use with some of my world champion athletes, and hopefully that gives a bit of a rationale and thought process as to how I view the performance picture. It's an it depends answer for many. It's not a one size fits all approach, but as long as you know the physiological adaptation you're trying to elicit from a specific exercise, then choose the exercise, drive the adaptation, and get the results. Cheers.